Hello everybody and welcome to my presentation from cannabis markets to a cannabis industry, building an architecture for Europe's next level cannabis economy. So just a little background information on myself. I'm the vice president since a couple of weeks of the German Industry Association, BvCW. I'm a board member and a coordinator for technology, commerce and services. I'm founder and CEO of MG Universe. And there's a little bit of back push. I don't know, it's maybe too loud. Thank you. And I'm the publisher of CrowdInvest and the second chairwoman of Empower Cannabis Society, which is an association dedicated to empower the women in cannabis globally. So I'm here today for the German Cannabis Industry Association. We are Germany's biggest cannabis association, representing the entire interests of companies across the German cannabis industry, and we work to advance the regulatory framework, professional market structure, and sustainable industry development in Germany, and hopefully also beyond in the future, and in collaboration with other industry associations. I'm personally a marketer. I have 2 economics degrees. My company MJ Universe is a strategic advisory. We are focused on representation, strategy, and acceleration, and especially turning our clients' complex market ventures into direction, legitimacy, and momentum. So what are we going to talk about today? Germany as a stress test. I think like a lot of eyes are looking at Germany at the moment and what is happening here. Current happenings beyond Germany, category and societal gaps that exist. Then we talk a little bit about market capture and about changing dynamics in the cannabis game. So what we already heard from Bedrocan today is like that the cannabis industry in Europe has demand, but it's quite fragmented. But actually, we don't have any coherent legal systems. We have a lot of fragmented rules and regulations across Europe for all the categories, referring to CBD, for example, for hemp, for medicinal cannabis, and of course for adult use cannabis. So from our industry association's perspective, the next phase will decide by the ability to create joint effort across the market to build a legal industry that is commercially viable, controllable, and socially legitimate, and trustworthy also means. That means. So we know that the demand exists. We have a massive medical market in Germany. It's particularly a self-payer market. We have some commercial infrastructure that's coming up more and more. More countries are making cannabis agencies to also produce cannabis for commercial purposes and for export reasons. But a lot of the demand that is in the market is still not legally, commercially, or socially captured, regulated, or actually feasible because we don't have adult use cannabis in Europe so far, except for in certain regions, in certain exemptions in the scientific realm. So, but we can see that reform is moving and that there is some progress in some countries, others are slowing down or moving backwards. For example, in Greece, there was just a news that came out today that they are trying to really prohibit CBD flower, which would be basically against also the market consolidated rules that are applying to the European region. So categories are unresolved, regulations are fragmented, and actually we're at a point where history repeats itself. Like if you remember back, we just talked about the Netherlands. There was once a legal cocaine company, a factory in the Netherlands. Yeah. So now we are basically at a point where we are at the same, route where we can go left or right, where we have been 150 years ago when prohibition really started, and these decisions had to be taken. To what extent do we want to really commercialize these kind of things? One thing that is also repeating itself is like prohibitionist narratives are reappearing. We can see a strong pushback from conservative forces, especially with the recent developments in the medical market, and a lot of patients getting access through that, being them patients or consumer, that's up to them and their doctor. But those narratives still shape the the direction we're going. And we can also see with the current happenings that have been in the US, where Trump attacked a boat and a farm that have been a milk farm. So those kind of things are actually just signs that the war on drug 3.0 is popping back. And one big thing that is missing is that the architecture is missing. So we have the laws, the trade rules, quality criterion, product pathway, supply chains, data, and all these kind of things. They're not yet aligned. On the other hand, there are some segments in the cannabis markets that are moving very fast. For example, the synthetic cannabinoids, like I don't refer to the proper cannabinoids, but the cannabis imitating stuff like HHC, TAC, and all those kind of things. Those are moving very fast, and the regulator is very hard for them to follow up on these developments. So what is currently happening in Germany, we are still Europe's largest import and sales market to date. In especially the medical part, we had an immense growth for import and supply quality. We have this quality gap that Jaap, you also referred to. Yeah, this is a big thing in Germany. We have a lot of price pressure. The kanji is going very slow. We had plenty of applications for scientific research. All of them have been declined to date, except for one cultivation application that has been approved by the BLE. We have the pharmacy infrastructure, we have the reimbursement for flower that is currently in debate, and we have also finished medicines development that will be pushing in the market, and that will bring a lot of dynamics, because if you look at the prescription pathway, it's always finished medicine on-label, finished medicine off-label, and then all the other things. So as soon as there is a finished medicine for something general like back pain, you can expect that at least in this segment there will be a lot of more pressure. Plus, there will be, like the health insurances potentially will have a deal with these finished medicines, so that's another thing you have to compete against. In Europe in general, we see national models moving at different speeds and under fragmented rules. In the Netherlands, for example, there is also the scientific supply project for the social clubs and those kind of things. In France, Czech Republic, Switzerland, UK are the most prominent developments, but all of these markets are developing very diverse, very differently, under very different regulations. Some of them even have their own regulations. For example, France for certain novel food that are in the nutritional supplements category. For CBD, novel food and hemp, and psychoactive substances, those things still remain unsolved. We have, I think, like over 200 novel food applications for CBD products at this point. None of them has been approved, which is also quite wild because there have been approvals for novel foods. There is currently a debate for a very low threshold, CBD threshold happening in the EU. They say that CBD may be genome mutative, so it changes your genes. So these are all discussions that are happening on the EU level. For hemp, we're discussing currently new acute reference doses, and in general, there is a pushback by the European Commission against all these HHC, novel psychoactive cannabis imitating substances that are where we don't know anything really about the toxicity of them. On an international level, there are also quite a couple of things happening that may be interesting for us here in Germany, and that actually bring several or comparable topics. For example, in the US, you have the Farm Bill consequences, where Trump basically he prohibited all hemp-derived cannabinoids unless they're medical. Yeah, so medical is opening up, but all these other things are going back. So if you think about Charlotte's Web, which has been developed as a medicine, but which was always like a nutritional supplement, for these kind of problems, they will face regulatory issues when you look at these kind of developments. But actually, I think that we in Germany have been dealing a little bit longer with these topics, so a lot of international collaboration should be a goal for all of us, because we can actually learn from each other and accelerate policy change. So what will happen on the US state level adult use markets? You all know that they are locally taxed. So what happens once Trump opens the national markets? There will be a big fight between local taxation and between national taxation, for example. And there is also some uncertainty on how this will affect adult use reform. But in the end, we see also international some reform drawbacks or setbacks from other international markets like Thailand, for example, who pushed back on their reform because it went too far. So global cannabis reform is rising, global trade barriers remain for now. So Germany's potential, actually, I think that Germany can turn its reform complexity into strategic leverage to, just checking which time, because I think the stage timer is wrong, into strategic leverage to become an industry reform reference point. So we're at this point in time where we have 1.5 years, roughly 2 years, until the final evaluation comes out of the CanG. So we actually should use this as a leverage point to start building industry reform and to really lobby for changes that can come now and to support the dialogue, because currently there's hardly any dialogue happening. That was way better in the old government. There was some exchange, there were some expert hearings, there were all these kind of things happening that are not happening at the moment, which is a shame, but those are definitely things we should push even on a European level more. I think like one is what is also interesting would be to align with global reform dynamics and trade compatibility with Canada, America, Asia, and other markets, or of course Europe also. But in the end, to use this opportunity that exists now to create real global standards and to set these standards in place. It's funny that you said that before, because there was a debate in 2019 about global medicinal cannabis standards, but then COVID hit and all these discussions went down the drain. So, and never happened again, so that's a big shame. So what do we need for the architecture build? We need structure that allows legal markets to centrally shape and locally steer, manage, and control. We need a place at the regulators table in global reform forums and UN single convention reforms, including alternative development. For those who don't know what alternative development means, usually it's replacing drug plans with books. But now that cannabis becomes a legal commodity, we can also replace illegal substances with legal cannabis cultivation as a great alternative also for making commodities like food, feed, fiber. There are some strategic cross-sectional architecture that we should really work on and try to also represent our countries across the industry, and that we make two-weighted, there is an opportunity nowadays for two-way trading, yeah, and not only one way, because usually it's everybody imports into Germany and then we get all the medicinal cannabis, majority of it gets destroyed or is not even in a good quality. It's also something that I observed over the time. But in the end, we have similar structural gaps across markets, and this combination creates a unique reform window. So Germany is particularly under review at the moment, because we are the largest market, as I said, and we're a live stress test for reform. You can see our domestic industry facing increasing political scrutiny, particularly with conservative voices going against it, even though many of the current challenges are just structural, homegrown, and solvable if we would really work on the topics. So where do legal cannabis structures work already? We have the grow clubs in Germany. There are quite a good amount of them online by now. Still not the amount that is required. If you compare it to pharmacies, we have roughly 15,000 pharmacies in Germany. So we would need roughly 12,000 clubs in order to supply the current supply situation. Where does the system break under real-world pressure? Well, I don't know if it is really a system break, but we have a lot of people going to the doctor and getting access through that. It's up to you if you think it's a system break. I personally think it's a harm reduction measure. but it's also something that I'm generally emphasizing. I think like the thing where our system breaks even more is the problem that we did not solve legal supply. We can see an increase in break-ins in pharmacies currently in Germany. There have been a couple over the last few months where people are breaking in, then they take the medicinal cannabis, and then it becomes, I don't know, medicinal marijuana because it's illegal. Then those are, for example, things where the pressure breaks, or we have not very high fines at the moment, which is a good thing, but through that, a lot of things happen in the background, and because there is no legal supply, of course, there are issues with this rising up. For example, people coming in from Spain or from California with suitcases of cannabis. Yeah, and so they even put out a notice from California. We have an issue with that, with people flying out with suitcases of cannabis. So, but this is just the reality of the situation, and we have to face that. What can we learn from upcoming reform phases to improve the status quo? I personally think there should be way more dialogue, and also how can we develop these fast industry developments, price pressure that many of you feel here in Germany potentially, and consumer demand and consumer safety. How can we bring these together? Because in the end, if you look at the real competitive field, what is affecting our competitive field is that we have the consumer reality itself. So consumers are price sensitive. Of course, they go to the pharmacy. It's cheaper than in the illicit market, which is great. Yeah, there is more trust, there is accessibility and convenience. You can have it delivered home. You have product diversity and usability. So all these kind of things are scenarios that you're considering in your buying decision. So this is one thing that you have to your consumer, how are they behaving in this competitive field? We have the public perception, we have media narratives, political framing, also the missing political willingness to certain things, some concerns, institutional reactions like the addiction doctors who are regularly on the fence. But all these kind of things are just there. Then we have established industries that are our competitors also to a certain extent, tobacco, alcohol, pharma, all these kind of things, and they have very different levels of influence than we have in lobby work. We have all unregulated alternatives like gray zones, category jumping, all those kind of things. Of course, and then we have the two opposite sides. We have the legal cannabis markets where there's a lot of M&A, there's a lot of investment with risk, there's the price wars currently happening, legal disputes, and a couple of court rulings. And in general, unfortunately, it's more competition over collaboration, but maybe we can get to change that over time. So, our biggest competitor, after all, is the illegal cannabis market. They don't have high operating costs, they don't have any taxation, they don't need any licenses, so they are fast and convenient, they can give gateway access to other drugs, and they have an established non-compliance. So what do we do with those kind of things? And what do we have to look at in terms of creating a good architecture is because legality alone does not create a market advantage. Legal system must be trusted and viable alternative. So this is an alternative we still have to create, particularly in Germany. And accountability has to be traceably run through the entire architecture. I mean, track and trace is also nothing that is a compulsory thing in the medical market to date. We have what can we do with this massive social and economic gap that we are holding currently? We have a massive market potential, and the markets are happening nevertheless. So how can we create taxes, jobs, and safer product dependent on the legal capture? Because all these things, a legal market without a social legitimacy cannot capture its real economic potential. Just to give you an example, I was supporting one of my clients from Canada to apply for a scientific research project with our German authorities that would have been 1,200 participants over the course of 3 years with maximum of 30 grams a month. 50 is allowed in Germany for the dispensing in the clubs. We said 30 only. They refused our project. They said we have too many participants, but it would have generated 2.7 million in value-added tax and 600,000 in commercial taxation from labor taxes and all those kind of things. So that's over 3 million just for 1,200 consumers over 3 years that the government does not want in taxes. And that's not even cannabis tax. Yeah. So one thing is also super important that we discuss more stigma-free communication, and that they are not that consumers or patients are not controlled by fear-based, outdated narrative, and that we focus more on real behaviors, needs, and social contexts. Unfortunately, there's hardly any research done in that part. I'm personally doing something with one of my professors in that regard for our project CINTA, Cannabis in Transdisciplinary Analysis, where we are collecting cannabis experiences. Then the topic of harm reduction should be considered a little bit different, because actually everybody supplying through the medical chain is a harm reduction measure, if there were a proper doctor in all cases, but that's also not always the case. So that is also something we need to discuss a little bit more. How can we develop consumption maturity within patients also? So for example, also patients like with other medicines make a little medicines break and those kind of things. So in general, in Germany, our legalization is not very just. So we are not a very social legalization. It's more everybody can smoke for their own, but please don't share, please don't give anybody anything, please don't just go to your home and consume there. So there's no real consumption spaces and all those kind of things. And those are all things that are missing. So how can we get from isolated gaps to a working system? The current gap is combined of fragmented regulations, unclear categories, weak representation, social and economic blind spot, competitive pressure, like all these kind of things, like making our lives harder. But across markets, we are still shaped by inconsistent rules, unresolved product definition, uneven enforcement, stigma, all those kind of things. And the next phase would need us to develop a smart, future-proof framework that connects legal pathways, regulatory coordination, market infrastructure, quality data systems, social legitimacy, and industry representation across the board. And actually, just to keep in the back of your head, we have a European drugs agency, so that theoretically could be also the drugs agency that is governing a European legalization. A working architecture means also building systems that make legal cannabis commercially viable, controllable, and investable. So this is how we can make cannabis reform happen. So reform opens the door, trust keeps it open. So I can just emphasize also again on what my speakers before said. So it's very important to create trust through quality education, safeguarding and accountability also, and reliability. To create value through and maybe also focus and emphasis more in the communication on these amount of taxes, jobs, research, local markets, and all that kind of things that have been created. And capture the real demand, even if it's just like in the possibilities that nowadays exist. But in general, we need to improve the readiness for the market, the supply chain, the wholesale, the point in sales, logistic, all those kind of systems are still pretty much fragmented. Regulatory, we should discuss more pathways, quality criterion, analytics, and taxation. In a social context, we should discuss more education, social, responsible marketing representation. Maybe also something interesting, because there have been a couple of court rulings that may affect especially the clinics platforms very negatively. So it's a question of how you deal with that, but there are compliant ways in marketing. If you want to find out more about that, you can hire MG Universe. And all those and then we can work on these things together, because there are definitely, like in other pharma topics, there are things you can communicate, and there are things that you can communicate with certain stakeholders. So what you need to do then is to create more initiatives with regard to pharmacies and with regard to doctors. I have been a marketing agency now for almost 10 years in the cannabis field. I can tell you for the last 2 years, nobody give a anymore about marketing initiative with direction to doctors and to stakeholders. So fortunately, I see that come back a little bit and makes me very happy. So from market to an industry, Europe's cannabis industry should now move from fragmented market activity to enable coordinated industries to stabilize, to structure, to create more quality criterion across the value chains and categories. And I mean, today is more a focus on medical, but there's also these topics for CBD, for hemp products of all kinds. So it's all a little bit fragmented. And as an industry, we need to earn our place at the table with all stakeholders through responsibility, cooperation, regulatory dialogue, and a shared commitment to making legal reform work safely in practice. So if you have time later and you want to join me at my table with the discussions afterwards, I would love to discuss with you 3 points on my table. How can Europe turn fragmented cannabis markets into a coherent legal industry through structured dialogue between all relevant stakeholders? How can the legal industry outperform unregulated illegal systems? And what role do responsible corporate behavior play in this? And how can we balance industry growth, consumer demand, and public safety concern in a way that supports broader reform goals? So these will be the topics at my roundtable. And thank you for listening. Join us at the member as a BvCW. And the presentation will also be available for download afterwards for those who in the portal here of the world-class business leaders. And yeah, if you're looking to connect with me, you can find my details here. And other than that, thank you for listening.